from that and you try again. So the idea is that this is quick, bite-sized learning, is that we want to help you get information, get education that is basically at your convenience. So you don't have to spend a lot of time and energy. You don't have to travel. A lot of this is free. You don't have to pay for it. So, this is kind of the strategy behind what we're doing today. And we're thrilled to have this group of folks on board today. Again, we've got John Rocca, Pete Knox, John Donovan, Bruce Lynn. And for those of you who are wondering, when we started advertising this session, is don't worry, we will have the ladies on tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to have a session on women in credit. And so there's everybody gets to be represented on these events, and we're happy to have everybody's expertise and experience. So this is our session. Again, a little bit about Hayako. If you have not yet gone on the hayako.com website, we encourage you to do so. There are probably over 120 different courses with over 1,400 video snippets. They're all anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes long. And the beauty is you can essentially go find whatever you want. It's kind of like the YouTube for credit and collection, cash, order to cash professionals, treasurer professionals. And we're even adding some other categories this year on personal skills and soft skills, development skills. So that's what we're doing. We are excited to have a lot of partners with us, some great speakers, and a lot of phenomenal folks on the audience who participated in the past as well, that we hope will do so today. So the session today is essentially about career. This is kind of our career development week. What do you do in credit? Is this a job that can give you a career? Is it just a job? And we think today that you're going to hear some good stories from the gentlemen that we have on the calls to share how they got where they got to, the paths that they took, and their perspectives on, if this is a career or a job that you like, how do you get to the next level? How did they do it? And what advice would they share with us? So again, this is our illustrious panel that we have today. And a little bit about the gentleman that we have speaking today. We're really excited to have Bruce Lynn. He's kind of a fresh face, new to the group, the world of credit collections that we've been in historically, been involved in the Financial Executive Networking Group. John Donovan, of course, tried and true, been around the blocks many times, and we're very happy to have him on board. And of course, Pete Knox, who we had to beg to come out of retirement, and we're thrilled to have his participation. He's got a lot of phenomenal experience and is happy to give back and start to share even while he's laying on the beach or playing on the golf course. And John Rocca, also incredible experience, and I think this whole group is just kind of the dream team, if you will, of credit collections and global operations and how do you get the job done. So what we're going to do is, again, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today. Thanks for having on the call. So we're going to get this started. We've got a couple questions here that we're going to go through. And again, we encourage you participation. We've got anytime, gentlemen, if you want to just pop in and give your thoughts on this. And for those of you who have joined us on the call, you can shoot us a note in the chat box. I think we're also live on LinkedIn, so feel free to put a comment in there as well. And we're going to start it with kind of our first question here and we're going to ask John Rocca to give his thoughts on this, which is essentially, from a management perspective, how do you go about identifying strengths? You hate to say weaknesses these days, right? It's really development opportunities. What's the best way to do it? What have you found works? What is more effective than other things that you've done in the past? What do you see, and kind of what are your brilliant thoughts on this topic?
It's an interesting question, and I'll give you a brief answer to it, and I'll back up. And before I give you my answer, I would suggest that in anyone's case, that you caucus with people that you respect, people that have experience that you want to gain, and develop a collaboration. Seek mentorship earlier in your career, at the middle of your career, and camaraderie, if not mentorship, towards the latter part of your career. Bounce off your ideas and ambitions and your concerns and your points of view with your colleagues. And when I think about the specific questions of strengths and development opportunities of staff, in my experience, most recently with Hitachi for the last 12 years, it's to meet with individual team members, first level supervisors, second level managers, at least quarterly. And even if it's 15 or 20 minutes, to schedule that brief conversation to review with them what are their ambitions and their aspirations and their desires? Because I have found that in my career, which goes back about 55 years in credit, I'm very well preserved, is that many people like exactly what they're doing. There are many people that love being collectors and wouldn't want to do any other job in the world. And before you help someone develop for the future, you have to find out what is their ambition. To sit down and talk to your team members and meet with them regularly. It doesn't have to be for long periods of time, but at least quarterly. Get that 15 or 20 minute or half hour conversation to ask how they're doing and what are their ambitions and aspirations. Because we all have transferable skills. The four that come to mind, the most important one is judgment. I remember about 1990 when I was the credit manager of the Hewlett-Packard Company. We took our North American and European credit managers to Houston for a 3-day session on building what was Model 90s. We were migrating from 55 sales offices to 2 shared service centers in the US, which eventually would end up in Romania and other parts of the world. And we had probably 40 different models in those 55 different offices. And we were trying to consolidate so that when we brought things together in 2 shared service centers, we were bringing together common processes. And what we worked on was, how do you evaluate people? And in 2 or 3 days with 7 or 8 senior managers, we concluded that the most important skill in credit, and probably in anything, is your judgment. It's how do you judge taking credit risk? How do you judge enabling revenue growth? Because the role of credit and collections is to support revenue growth and then collect the receivable. But it's to grow revenue and manage the associated risk. So from a management perspective, the strengths and development opportunities of your staff are good judgment, awareness, good listening skills, listening to what goes on in the sales process, because we're there to support selling. Nothing happens that's more important than this person who makes the sale, and then we get to manage the order. I'll stop there and give my colleagues an opportunity to chime in and maybe enhance or correct what I've said. And if no one speaks up, I'll call on John Donovan, but I won't do that right away because I won't get the floor back. Pete, what are your thoughts in this area?
Thanks, John. So actually, you covered it very well, I thought, John. One of the things that we did at Nestle was, again, as you said, we met with our employees to get their interests and then usually assign them to a project where they were interested in contributing. And then through that project, we would be able to identify what strengths they had and also opportunities where we could strengthen some of their skills. So as you mentioned, meeting with people and showing them that you care enough to help them will go a long way in creating trust between management and their employees, and just helping them along in developing their skills.
I'm going to jump in here because I think this is an important point that you both made, right? There's those that are individual contributors that literally love their job. They want to be a collector. They have no desire for management, but it doesn't mean that they don't want to move up and grow and make more money in advance, but they don't necessarily want to be management. And a lot of times I think we think that the only way that you can expand and grow is you've got to go from an individual contributor to a manager. And I think we end up with a lot of bad managers sometimes that way, What are your thoughts on, how do we do a better job of recognizing that being an individual contributor and doing a rock solid job is absolutely critical and needed? And how do we foster that without pushing people to management in order to get promoted?
So if I can go back to the comment earlier about listening to your company. Is the organization that you're in, have they given enough thought to developing a growth path for individual contributors? If they haven't, you have a choice. You can be a pioneer and help them get there, or you can then start to look around. And I can remember in the middle of my career at Hewlett-Packard, the executive I worked for said, John, you should be interviewing every 2 or 3 years. And he didn't mean inside Hewlett-Packard. I said, Dick, do you want me to leave? And he said, no, I want you to know your value. And the only way to know your value is periodically to interview with other organizations. And he said, we have enough confidence to think that, you've got a pretty good deal here, John Rocca. And he was sort of right, because I only left HP once and came back. I knew people that left 4 times and came back 5 times. But it was one of those few companies that would allow you to do that. I've also worked for companies that said, if you leave here, you can never come back. And I said, and that's an incentive to stay?
Right.
So listen to what's going on in the company that you work with. But it's unlimited where people can grow to if they have good listening skills, if they have good awareness of somebody may call awareness street smarts, good judgment, and a body of experience. Those 4 things together, Pete may divide them into 3, John Donovan may divide them into 5. John, I didn't call you on you. I'm talking about you. I'm not asking you to talk yet. I want you to save yourself. But John Donovan, chime in.
You want me to chime in?
Yeah.
You gonna let me go?
Briefly.
Well, I agree with you and Pete. There's a lot to career development, and my background is probably the most diverse as far as my exposure to different company cultures. And I started my career with General Motors, and most of the people I worked with were lifetime employees, something you don't see in today's environment. And the exposure that you get in an environment like that is all kinds of different personalities, management styles, and they really focused on how to grow the employee once they join the organization. So they would rotate people, myself included, in their, I won't call it management training, but it was really a culture change from one division to another, from one office to another. There was reams of material to read about the job. But the thing that I found most valuable, as John pointed out, is mentorship. Because you were rotated into different environments, you got exposed to different working skills. Not all of them were along the lines that you wanted to have a career path in. But I moved from collections to outside in sales, back inside as manager of credit, then back into credit and collections, and then from there into field management, working with dealerships. So the exposure was great. And each of those opportunities that I was given was sort of like a 2-year mentorship program. So you spent 2 years in a job. You got to know it. You got to know the personalities, not necessarily the same office, but you got to watch different management styles. That was the mentorship program that they had. It's unfortunate you don't see that in companies today as much as you used to. And they've gotten away with, you'll hear Six Sigma and a few of the other process improvements, but it's nothing like working with somebody in the culture that you're in different environments. And so I think that if you look at your career development, the more rounded you can become, the more valuable you are to any organization.
And
it's
Michelle,
important.
I'll just close with this, and it's not an advertisement, but it's a perspective. I'm not selling anything. But if anyone wants to discuss, well, what does mentorship mean? And how can I get into a mentorship relationship with the right individual? I'm happy to chat with anyone about that topic offline, and you can find me through LinkedIn. And I'll leave it there. And I'll stop because we eventually have to get to John Donovan.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. So we'll kind of move to the next question on our.
I think a little perspective here. Rocca and I were competitors for years. And he's just a little jealous. I always won.
Love it. Okay, so here's a good one that you could probably all weigh in on as well. Maybe we'll get some comment from Bruce too, is when someone is really in that spot and they do want to move up, they have some ambition, they don't just want to sit there and post payments all day long or make collection calls all day. What's the best way for all of us to communicate to our upper management that we do want to move up, we want to advance, either in this department or within the organization? What's the best way to do that other than just saying, hey, I want a promotion, which can be obviously perceived as kind of obnoxious?
So I'll start with this one. So I'll start with, there's a number of ways you can do it. I'll start with just in your annual performance review. Express an interest to your manager that you're interested in career advancement, and then ask them for their advice on, what do I need to do to get to the next level, and ask them for coaching. And then, as John mentioned in the beginning of this, set up a monthly or a quarterly meeting with your manager to get feedback on your performance, and just get advice from your manager as well. Am I doing the right thing to get to the next level? Also, and we've touched on this a number of times, seek out a mentor. And that mentor does not necessarily have to be in your department. Go outside of your department. Go find somebody in an area that you're interested in. And it's flattering for an employee to go to a person and ask them to be their mentor. So I think you'll find that people are very open to mentoring others. So don't be afraid to ask. And, especially seek out someone who is highly respected within the company, because obviously they're highly respected for a reason. So getting advice from them and coaching from them will help you in your career. Also, volunteer for projects or opportunities within the department or the company. What a great way to learn more about the company, about a different area, about many areas, and also a great way to network, because working on a project with others outside of your group earns you a reputation of what kind of a worker you are. So take every opportunity you can to volunteer for different projects within the company. And as I mentioned, networking. Networking is so important. That's where many jobs are found, through networking. So many different career opportunities can be found through networking. And when I say networking, both inside your company as well as outside your company, there's a lot of different credit groups outside of your company, anything from NACM to Credit Research Foundation to industry groups. All of those are great for networking and potentially finding opportunities to help you in your career. And then the last thing, work hard in the current role you're in. A number of times I would see people get to the next level, but they immediately set their sights on the next level. No, do learn the level that you're at, do a great job at it, and that the following level will come to you. So don't worry about that. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, Pete, I like your approach on that. And this kind of goes into our next question, really. It's, this is advice on what to do, but, can any of you gentlemen think of, is there something that you did that was along the lines of that, asking for, saying, I've got interest in moving ahead. Is there anything kind of unusual that maybe your peers didn't do that you did that enabled you to kind of get in a path that maybe others didn't, because you took a kind of the road less traveled, or you just took a different approach?
I could probably answer that better than anybody else since I've taken the approach so many times. I think it's important when you're talking with your peers or talking to your manager about your career path, remember, it's your career path, not theirs. So you have to be prepared when you go and ask for additional challenges to know what you're going to do. An example of what not to do is people would come to me during the review period and say, I've been here for a year and I deserve a raise. And I worked for a company that sold human resource development software. And one of I think the failures of that software was it really didn't look at what the person was doing. It looked at the results. So if you're going to rotate and support other people, make sure that they know that you're advancing your career by learning what they do and try to do it as good as them or better.
I think it's great feedback.
Michelle, just a couple of personal stories. So the first one, there are times when you're going to have to take risks, and two come to mind for me. One of my first jobs in credit, I was actually moving from a very solid, a financially strong company to a highly leveraged company. And I remember interviewing with the CFO, and he told me, you have to understand that we're highly leveraged, and we could go bankrupt. And so I looked at him and I said, no guts, no glory. And that got me the job.
You're kidding.
No, I know that line got me the job.
That's hilarious.
But that was really the first job that I had in credit, and I was only there for a year and a half because it was high leverage company. I said to my wife, we can never buy a house while I'm with this company. And then I moved on to a different company, a much more financially stable company. The second one was I expressed an interest, and this was with Nestle, in potentially working overseas. And an opportunity came up for me to work in Switzerland, which is Nestle's world headquarters. And I think my boss at the time didn't think I would move, or my wife would move, and we moved. So we went overseas and worked over there for 2.5 years. We were developing a credit and AR system for Nestle worldwide. And what a great opportunity that was, because I got to see not just the US, but the entire Nestle world. And it's very different across the world. But the risk that I took there was I left the US market. When you leave your market or your job, the risk is that they learn to work without you. And so what's really important is that you stay in touch with that market or that department and let them know you're still there and you're coming back. And then talk about, things that you're doing and some of the successes you're having, so that there is an opportunity for you to come back, and make sure that you be aware of opportunities that will open up in that group so that you can fit back in.
It's a great point. It's kind of a double-edged sword, right? You leave and they're like, oh my God, what happened? How could we operate without Pete? And then after a while, they're like, we can't operate without Pete, right? So keeping things relevant, and I think that's a great point. Absolutely appreciate those answers. So we're gonna see if we can pick the brain of Bruce Lynn here a little bit on this next question.
Michelle, before you go to the question, excuse me for interrupting, but
Yes.
there was a question from one of the panelists that Judith, who is on the call, had asked the question or posed the question that networking is very difficult during COVID. And John or Pete, any thoughts in that regard about how to address networking during the period that hopefully we're actually coming out of, but we could go back into again?
Oh, and even before you answer that, we also had a comment. I'm not sure which John this is meant for, but can either John Rocca or John Donovan turn up your volume just a little bit more or speak a little louder?
Mine's all the way up.
Okay.
I apologize if I'm
Okay,
not
no problem.
enough.
Well, if they can let us know which one, I put my headset on because I didn't know if it was me or the other John.
Okay, you're both
Okay.
coming through loud and clear as far as I can tell.
Okay.
So yeah, if you address that, just that the challenges with COVID, right? How do we stay connected and you're right. I think there's a lot of opportunities here, but from your perspectives, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been living through COVID from the get-go, and I worked with a number of companies as a consultant who are faced with that exact problem. People are moving out of expensive cost of housing to less expensive cost of housing because COVID has gone on so long. The challenge is twofold. One, if they call them back, they're not there. And I think that's the reason so many people are leaving their jobs. They figured they'd never have to go back because the companies are selling off their real estate and expensive rental property. The other issue, of course, is how do you have camaraderie? Well, we're an example right now of how you can establish camaraderie. No one likes meetings, but it is great to do face-to-face, whether you're in a conference room. And quite frankly, I prefer this over a conference room because nobody's picking up their phone or going online because you're there, right? Mm-hmm. So I've been in meetings where half the people are texting on their phones under the table. And to me, that's not productive use of people's time. This is, because it's short, it's measured, and it's recordable so that you can go back and you've got notes. What better way to attend a meeting?
Good point. Good point. Absolutely. Yeah, we've got a lot. I think this whole concept, this move to, we've been forced to move to these video calls as something that we really rejected years ago. They were available years ago, but nobody wanted to do it. And it just seemed ridiculous. And now it's become such a part of the norm that I think it gives us a lot more flexibility as we go forward, right? The hybrid approach. It's like we can do both. We can do video, we can get together in person, whatever makes sense. And it really is, it's added a whole nother layer of the ability to network and stay connected.
Yeah, one of the things we did, we had Zoom coffees. So it was a 15 to 20 minute call, have a cup of coffee and just talk. And it's a great opportunity to network, and not just within the company, but if you called somebody outside of the company and set up a Zoom call, that was a good, actually the best way to network while we were all working from home. Hopefully that's starting to change.
Yeah, it'll be nice to actually get together in person in the coming months. I hope that does happen. Wonderful. Okay, so Bruce Lynn, let's see if we can get you involved in this conversation a little bit. Love to have your thoughts on this next question here about just the interviewing process. And, things have changed so much in the last years and decades on how to prepare for an interview, the questions that are asked. And, how do you behave? How do you dress? All those things. Bruce, what you've been around the block quite a bit, and even the Treasury end. And, I think you've got some great insights that you could share with us on just kind of what you see kind of works today that maybe didn't work back then, and maybe vice versa.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, a couple of ideas. I mean, in my prior life, I have run a credit collection area. I do most of my work today in the Treasury area. And I think that people in the credit collection area really have some major advantages. And one of them is to really understand what's of value to the company. So if you're looking for career advancement, you really have to understand what your counterparty is looking for. Now, that could be someone in a different area within the company, or it could be others outside the company. But I think the one thing to think about is what is a value? And in credit collection, of course, the idea of cash is important. I mean, that's sort of why you're there. That's why you're making those calls. But also think about who you're talking to.
Yeah.
And this is where I think credit collection has an unparalleled perspective on the process, because you're talking to that part in the company that actually contributes to revenue. In other words, the customer. I mean, if the customer isn't paying you, there's probably some reasons for that. So you want to understand, first of all, who you're talking to and sort of how they feel about the company. And you are really on the front lines when it comes to that. So if you're looking for advancement and you really want to talk to others in the company, find out what's of value to them. And if it happens to be their customer, I mean, at the end of the day, you can talk about markets all you want, but markets are composed of customers, and it's what the customer wants. It's the customer buying that product, and they're buying it and they're contributing cash flows. So how does that help you? If you're looking for advancement, you want to know a little bit more about the customer. You want to know the kind of cash flow that you can generate, because the more cash flow you can generate for your company, the less that company needs to borrow. And in today's environment, with interest rates increasing, the more they borrow, the more it's going to cost, unless they can sort of self-fund themselves by making sure the customer pays you sort of on time in the amounts that they should be paying you. In other words, if there's a dispute and they're paying you less than the full amount, well, why is that? And the more you know about that, the more you are of value to, let's say, a business unit. Again, it's difficult to ascertain what people want to do when they grow up. I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. But if you are looking for that, then what is of value to that other person? And so in your interviewing process, if you can understand that, then that makes you more valuable to them.
Have you ever had any, kind of like to Pete's point about, was there any one thing that stuck out in your mind that you've seen over your career where somebody just had the perfect response to just make you think, yeah, this person gets it, let's move this person ahead? Or the alternative where they just said so many things that just knocked them out of the running immediately?
I can't think of any one thing, but to understand how the company bills, I think is important. To really understand the entire process, not just a little sort of invoice that's in front of you, or the fact that you made 10 collection calls in the last, certain period of time. It's I guess, to use a good German word, it's the Gestalt. It's the entire process. It's a holistic view of why the company's in business. And if you can understand that, it will prepare you for the next step in your career, because you'll understand more about the company. I mean, after all, the company is in business to make money, to produce a product that is the envy of its competitors. It's not in business to make more collection calls. That's just a small part of the process. So you have to look beyond what you're doing today to understand how that's important to the company. And again, I'm not sure, a lot of people like to look at dealing with various problems. I think one of the great problems to solve is getting involved in that dispute process. And that dispute is caused by, well, it's difficult to say what causes a dispute, but the ability to resolve that makes you very valuable to the customer. And how do I say this nicely? If you have to leave the company, who would you go to work for? Maybe it's for that customer that you've been on the other side of the desk. So again, a career can be within the company or a career can be outside of that company. And if you have to look outside the company, working for that customer that you've been talking to for the last 2 or 3 years, maybe that is your next career move.
I think that's a perfect segue into kind of just the next question that a lot of us that have worked in credit and collections, there's oftentimes a disconnect between the world of the CFO and the Treasury world versus credit collections. And what I think a lot of us are trying to do here is kind of connect some of these dots on starting in credit and collections is a phenomenal baseline. It's a phenomenal education to get you an understanding of the business, and that there are ways to go. There are career paths. It isn't just, you go to another company, you do the same thing. You're posting checks, you're processing credit apps. But how do you get the awareness of folks that are in those roles about, like, there is more to this. There's Treasury, there's operations, there's finance and accounting. What kind of guidance would you give someone to really see, what's possible within your own organization, that those skills that you achieved, that you're learning right now, the basics, the fundamentals, how does that parlay into success further up the chain of career?
Well, here's a good example. I mean, the credit collection department has really an unparalleled view, sort of up the pipeline of how things occur. They are, basically one step away from collecting that cash. I mean, I think it's axiomatic that if you make a sale and can't collect the cash, the sale did not happen. And companies are in business to sell things. And so if people are paying you less than the full amount, or they're paying you the full amount, but in some very long time period, you have that point of view where you can see why that happened. Invoices are poorly described what the thing is that is to be paid for. You are dealing with disputes because every time something arrives, it's always broken. I mean, with the exceptions, companies want to pay you, but they won't pay you if you ship them the wrong color, or you ship them too late, or it's whatever. So you need to be able to go to that department within your company, sales, business unit, operations, finance, whatever, and find out why the thing went wrong. And you have that long view. So I would suggest that you deal with this not so much as a finance function, but what I'll call sort of a relationship function. The questions are, what are the relationships that are important to the company? And as you, again, why do people like things or they don't? That's a much more difficult question to ask. But from where the credit collection person stands, you can see that maybe the problem is in billing, maybe it's in procurement, maybe it's in some other area, and you can be a problem solver, and that is typically very valuable. The question is, who is it valuable to? That means that you really need to focus on what sort of makes you happy. I mean, there's a lot of problems in the world. Some of them I have no ability to resolve, and quite frankly, I'm not interested in solving them. So you sort of go with what you know, but at least in credit collection, you have that perspective to see a much wider world than other areas within the company.
Yeah, that's a great point. In the credit collection area, I mean, any issue in the order to cash process ends up in credit AR in the form of a non-payment or a deduction.
That's right.
And anybody in credit and collections is really a problem solver. And most of our customers are like, from my point of view, 99% of our customers wanted to pay us, but it was something that we did that kept them from paying us or paying us in full. So being a problem solver is so important, and not only recognizing the problem, but then working with others to fix that problem so it doesn't happen again. You are contributing to the betterment of the company as a whole, not just from the efficiency standpoint, but from the customer satisfaction standpoint.
No, I'll give you an example from of a couple of other things to be aware of as a credit collection professional. And it comes down to know your customer. I mean, there are certain customers who are, quite frankly, very profitable. And sure, they don't pay on time, or they yell and scream or whatever. But how do I say this nicely? The profit margins are so large that no one is going to get too excited because, quite frankly, the company is making a lot of money. They're a very major customer, and so you take a little bit of heat because of that. But then there's the other side of that coin, and one of the things that I don't think is desirable in any company, which is, the only thing worse than a low margin customer is a low margin customer that pays you late. And you have to know what the overall profitability and relationships are, so you know whether it's important or not to push back on that customer. We had a case when I was working in a credit collection area, which was a very large customer. They made up 5% of the top line of the company. They're a very large customer, very well known actually, but we didn't make any money. And the reason we didn't make any money is because they never paid their bills on time. They demanded that they only, be charged a certain amount over the base cost of the materials. So at the end of the day, this was a low margin customer that didn't pay you well. And so there's some point in time in which you basically have to kick them out of the lifeboat because the capacities that they were using up could have been devoted to other customers that were more profitable in the short run and in the long term. I mean, arguably, you don't want to do business with just everybody. You want to do business with people in which there is a value to do so from both sides. And again, the credit collection people really have this perspective about good customers versus bad customers. And of course, every company has bad customers. And so the question now is, how do you deal with that, or how do you know that's happening? And this is where credit collection people have the ability to talk to some of the highest levels in management to figure that out.
It's a good point that you have, but I think it's also important to understand that companies have become very siloed because of shared service centers and outsourcing. And as a result of that, they become a specialist at one thing and one thing only. And as soon as they are outside the box, you'll hear more often than not, it's not my job, let me transfer you to somebody else, rather than taking initiative. And initiative is the most important part of career growth. If you're not willing to do and go the extra mile, chances are neither will the person that's reviewing you.
I think that's a very good statement. It's, there's many ways to say that, sort of no pain, no gain, but absolutely, I think initiative is important because it shows everyone, for better or for worse, that you are serious and care about contributing to the company.
Mm-hmm. Well, we got a question actually that came in from Kim Price, and she said, can any of you give an example of how that conversation went with sales on this bottom line issue, such as, it's a good comment about how we spend our time. Also, she loved the statement that not all business is good business. Any thoughts on or stories that you all can tell about how those types of conversations went?
Well, if you're dealing with sales and you're in credit, it's all about commissions and revenue, right? And on the other side of the coin, it's all about recovery and risk. So it depends on which side of the equation you are on when you're making your decisions or recommendations. And I think it's important to work with the people rather than against them. And so often I hear, oh, they're the sales prevention department. Mm-hmm. And they don't understand the magnitude of what the person is faced with. Is it credit risk? Is it billing associated deductions? Or like you heard earlier, is the issue with the customer or is it with us? And if you don't know, you shouldn't second guess it. You should get familiar with the billing department, the logistics department, the carriers. All of them contribute to the success or failure of an organization. And if you have the wrong partner taking your goods from point A to point B and they damage them along the way, it's neither company's fault. It's logistics. And you've got to understand how they're involved in the equation. And that's where going the extra mile, rather than say, well, that's the billing department, I'll give it to them and let them figure it out, right? Same thing with cash applications. If you're going to advance yourself, you have to understand every aspect of the business, and you've got to learn it. You've got to learn it well, and no better place to start than credit.
Totally agree.
I'll give you an example of an issue that I was talking to the treasurer about of a company, one of my former clients. And I asked the treasurer, I said, when do you borrow most during the month? And he said, well, I borrow most during the middle of the month. And so by looking at the trend in accounts receivable and the collections thereof, I was able to show him that in the middle of the month, nobody collected any money. Because the way the company worked is that the company gave people bonuses at the end of the month, depending on their AR levels. So and I'm making a point here, for 28 days during the month, nobody really collected their receivables except for the last 2 days before everything closed, so they could show from an accounting standpoint that their receivables were lower or at least the same as they were at the beginning of the previous month. So what happened here is it's a real cost to the company because the treasurer is borrowing interest expense and nobody's collecting ARs. The cash all comes in, but 28 days later, you're out of cash, certainly for a large period of time, which is to say that the treasurer ends up paying interest expense on the money borrowed. Meanwhile, the business areas look good because at the end of the month, their ARs were at the same level, maybe lower than they were from the previous month. So the business units and the Treasury Department are out of sync. And there's a real cost here. Now, there's a way to figure that out, of course, is you could start internal chargebacks to the sales areas if they fail to collect their receivables, or if they don't collect their receivables on time, so that you internally charge them for the cost of funds. And all of a sudden now, you go below that EBITDA line, which most business units are managed on, and start getting into that cost of funds. And especially if there are disputes, because again, if you don't collect it, it's not a sale.
Exactly.
Michelle, if there's time, I wanted to go back to Kim's comment or question, if I could, and also to, at the same time, comment on Bruce's last comment, because I think it's relevant. The role of credit, we're part of the quality process. Pete mentioned it, John mentioned it, I think. The only time the customer has a chance to give us feedback is when we ask them to pay us. And then they give us all that feedback. And it's how do we encapsulate it, digest it, and move it around our organizations to improve our business processes. So credit is the beginning of a quality process. You don't, and when I say credit, I mean collections, cash applications, so the whole team.
I think you're right. You know, it always brings to mind this whole, like, a lot of times the theme has been, okay, we'll give you information on a need to know basis. And it's like when you operate in those silos, when you don't really understand what's going on in the entire business, how can you possibly apply what you've learned and what you're experiencing in your organization to how to help it move to the next level? Which is kind of our next question here is, you know, what we see in credit and collections, we know those pitfalls and we know those opportunities. We see them all the time based on pays, not pays, relationships. You know, when you talk about this next question about how can we proactively go to senior management when we know the company wants to grow and expand, you know, what are your thoughts on the best ways to kind of position the knowledge that's gained in credit and collections to kind of get that seat at the table to say, hey folks, we see XYZ happening. Therefore, if we want to grow the business, here's what we could do from our end to facilitate that. What are your thoughts on that, or what have you seen in that arena?
Well, let me go back to Bruce's last comment and touch on this, and then I'll be quiet so somebody else can chime in. Better experience than me. Bruce's point is true, but there's a reason for it. We book orders at the end of the month, and if you're in a highly successful company that's growing exponentially, as I once was, from $1 billion a year in 12 years as when I was credit manager to 47 billion, you can turn bad business down because you can't ship all that stuff.
Mhm.
But the most recent 11 years and 9 months I spent with a company that was 3.5, almost $4 billion when I joined it. And it was 3.5, almost $3 billion when I left it. That company couldn't afford to turn any order down.
Mhm.
And you've got to partner with revenue. You've got to find a way to book every deal and record revenue on the deals that you're highly probably going to collect on. If the business is willing to take the risk because they can't afford to lose an order, you have to shift the way you approach things.
Yep.
And you articulate to the CFO, to the controller, to the treasurer, here's the level of risk. And they help you make the right decision. And you aren't wrong by saying, this is too much risk. Now, at the end of the quarter or the end of the month, people pay the bills then, because when you don't have enough orders, you ship everything at the end of the month because your pricing gets better at the end of the previous month or 60 days before it, and it's a hockey stick. You're shipping in the last 3 to 4 business days of a quarter, and you're selling on 30 or 60 or 90-day terms. Everything comes due at the end of a period. If you manage your terms, not to offer creative financing, but if you offer early payment discounts for payment in certain days, you can address the issue that Bruce raised and this question raises. You can induce people that have the cash to pay you when you want to get paid, and you pay a price for it, but it's probably a cheaper price than the Treasury pays. And even if it's just as expensive, the Treasury doesn't pay that price. Sales does, because it's a cost of sales. It's not a cost of the Treasury. And we all get measured differently. Sales gets measured differently than Treasury, and credit people work for the Treasury and they work for sales. So you have multiple leaders that you have to help succeed.
I would add to that. I think that's all true. I would add to that by saying that the kinds of metrics that a company has, especially around the metrics of quality and risk, are, in my opinion, need much more work. And again, I'll be an equal opportunity blamer here. I don't know if there are any companies that really have strong risk measures, actually with the exception of banks, which is sort of outside of the scope of what we're talking about here. Although interesting enough, in a corporate world, they talk about ARs, but in the finance world, they talk about loans, but it's really all the same thing. You're extending credit, different accounting rules, of course. But the idea of quality and risk and a set of metrics that make sense across the organization, which I think was John was talking about, is something that needs a lot more development in a company. So when you're looking for people here, this is something that you really need to think about, because the people who are involved on a day-to-day basis, they have a certain perspective, and you want to draw that out so that you set the appropriate targets based on the capabilities of those people, not only in Treasury, for example, but in Treasury and all the other areas that Treasury works for, sort of a series of concentric circles. And there are intersections that hopefully are well known, but where they do intersect, you want to make sure that you have a commonality, a metric, if you will, that measures the kind of quality that John was talking about.
Great points, great points. And we're kind of running up. I think we technically have about 2 minutes left, but if you gentlemen will join us for another couple minutes here, we've got another question to go, and we probably would open up for questions as well. I think this is a great conversation. I think this kind of sets the stage for even future conversations. I think a lot of these points we can delve into much, much deeper. There's a lot of ways to skin the cat here. But so let's go to our final question here, is when you look at qualifications and background, are there certain things that you really are looking for that, again, either knock somebody out of the running or immediately pull them in? What have you seen? Has it been a pretty standard process, or is it really case by case?
Well, in the case of this question here, if you're interviewing for someone for a Treasury staff position, again, I would be looking for someone who really understands the order to cash cycle. Because the more cash that I as the company have, then the less I have to borrow. If that company is paying me in a certain currency, and I know what those currencies are, the less exposed I am to the volatilities in the currency market. Because when it comes to borrowing, when it comes to investing, when it comes to exposure in the foreign exchange markets, these are uncontrollable for all intents and purposes, no matter how big a company you are. I don't care whether you're Apple or Joe's Bar and Grill. Nobody can control the foreign exchange market. So the volatility of your earnings, I mean, today, for example, if you're billing in dollars into Europe, that's going to be tough, because how are the companies in Europe, especially in Eastern Europe, going to pay you in dollars? So it's very expensive for them. And if it's that expensive, then they're not going to do business with you, because they don't have US dollars. All they have is local currencies. So I have to have someone who understands that. And obviously we can come up with solutions and talk about those. But if you're talking about Treasury staff, I need someone who understands that. And we're talking about customers here, customers who are buying my product, my company's product. And if I know that, that's the person I really want, because they have that insight, and then we'll work together to solve the next series of problems.
I'd like to chime in on that, because today with artificial intelligence, the gatekeepers, whoever that might be, whether it's an IT system or an individual, has got a list of qualifications that the manager is looking for. However, I'll go back to what Pete said. Networking is so important. If somebody knows your skill set, your drive, and your desire, that's worth a lot more than what a piece of paper and a checklist can provide somebody that's interviewing for a position. So it's important to network, because those people know your skill set, they know your qualifications, and they can help you get past the gatekeepers. And quite frankly, artificial intelligence is just that. It's artificial.
I think one way to do that, and maybe it's been said before, but you have to obviously build up your relationships inside your company. In terms of outside the company, I think joining various organizations, professional organizations, other networking groups would have similar, maybe even dissimilar people in them, so that over time, and I can say this looking back now, I do start to bump into the same people. Maybe they've changed jobs. They're working for company B when I knew them, they were working for company A. But over time, as you advance yourself, you keep bumping into the same people. And that's because you're in the same organizations. There's a bad side of that, I guess. I mean, if 10 years from now, it's going to be much, much tougher to all of a sudden drop all of that and take up a completely brand new. I mean, my professional baseball career is really over. It's too late for me. But so maybe I should have done something earlier, like join some organizations and take more practice and take more courses for credit or whatever. So you can never stop learning. And that means you really have to be on the lookout for that next organization, because as John mentioned, that's how you build your network.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. There's the, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I think it's probably actually both, right?
Yep.
Both things are just as important. Absolutely. Okay, I think we are rounding up here. We'd love to get some feedback from the folks on the call. If you've got a few seconds, we'd love to have you just give your feedback on the session, rate us if this is valuable, helpful. Give us some feedback on that, and we'd love to have your comments later after the session is over with as well. And we're kind of over time, but if we've got some other questions that have come in from folks, we would love to entertain that as well. Anybody that we've got a few folks still that are hanging in there with us. And if we don't have any questions too, which it looks like, let me see if we've got anything on LinkedIn. Very informative session, good stuff. yeah, I think this really kind of could be a springboard for a lot of other detailed sessions. We brought up a lot of good topics, and they're all worthy of additional time and development. So we thank everyone for joining today, and I think this will be a good kickoff to this year and where we want to go next, what we want to do, and we got a lot planned this year. So speaking of kind of what we're doing this week, tomorrow we've got a session on breaking the glass ceiling, kind of women in credit, that we would love to have folks join. And frankly, we'd actually love to have some of you gentlemen join us. We have a lot of females that are logging on, because obviously that's a topic that's near and dear to those of us who are female, is how do we succeed in this industry, which is strangely very welcoming to women, but there's still some challenges in really getting promotions and getting the C-suite, et cetera. And we've also got an online forum that we'd love to have folks that are on the call ask questions. We've got our experts here on board that are here to answer those questions and to make the connections. I encourage every one of you, connect with our folks here on LinkedIn, build that network of yours. This is really what it is. It is about who you know, in addition to what you know. And everyone here on the call today is willing to take your LinkedIn connection and have conversations with you. That's really what it's all about. And of course, we got to make our last pitch. It looks like we are taking Radiance is actually going to be happening in Nashville at the Nissan Stadium, and that's coming up at the end of April. And we'd love to have any and all of you there as well. And I think just as we close this out, please feel free to again connect with us on LinkedIn, shoot us some notes, some questions. I think you've got our contact information on one of these slides here in the process. But we'd like to keep the conversation going. I think this is a great topic. There's a lot of areas to explore. Gentlemen, any kind of parting thoughts that you have on this topic, or ideas for future sessions that you think would be valuable based on our conversation today?
More John Donovan.
Thank you, John.
The only comment I would offer is that one person's AR is another person's AP. And so there certainly is a relationship between the two groups inside and outside the company. And given today's environment, working capital issues, supply chains are becoming more and more important. So I think that the credit and collection professionals, in the broadest sense of the word, is only going to become more valuable over time.
Absolutely.
Great. Yes, it's a great place to start. Really launches a lot of careers. So, okay, I think we're pretty much out of time here. I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today and participating. A lot of great minds here, lots of great experiences, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun this year, really digging deeper into some of these topics and pulling in a lot of diverse opinions and stories and life experiences. So we appreciate everyone's time. Have a great day. Give us some feedback, shoot us a note, and hopefully you all will join us for tomorrow's session, as well as we have the same group of gentlemen joining us on Wednesday for kind of the next edition of this as we dig